afternoon, everybody. I can see our clock is ticking already. Too efficient. All right, since we have no time to waste, I figure we'll start with some intros. Alicia.
Great. Hi, my name is Alicia Garabedian. I'm a vice president at Left Lane Capital in London. We're a $2.2 billion VC growth equity firm that invests globally, typically Series A to Series C. Excited to be here today.
Next in line, Simone from Join Capital. I'm an investment manager. Join Capital is a deep tech fund, pan-European, based in Berlin, office in Milano and London. I'm based in Milano. We invest in deep tech seed Series A. We tend to lead round 1 to 5 million.
Nice.
Hi, my name is Stefan Heilmann. I'm the CEO of IEG, which is an integrated 25-year-old investment bank, or tech investment bank. I run our Abu Dhabi and India office for one, and I'm looking at anything which is health tech, healthcare, and aging societies, and also in our principal investment activities. Good to meet you all.
Awesome. Great intros. So I guess my first question is around innovation. Like, how do you balance the idea for innovation for, I guess, frontier tech, emerging tech, versus, I guess, proven business models, particularly when you're looking at Europe, where we've got a lot of saturated markets, or ones that are quite mature? So how do we make sense of that? And how do we invest in ways that create that meaning for the startups? Hit me with it. Go for it, Stefan.
Go for it.
Okay. So how do I balance this? First of all, my simple answer to that is I'm typically not a guy for the moonshot innovations, as I can't grasp the return and risk-return profile, for one. So therefore, it sounds very boring, but I look whether innovation or not, whether the underlying has a gross margin which is sufficient for my purposes. So if the business actually is allowed to do money when it's fully fledged, alive, and kicking, if that's the case, I think it's a great innovation.
Yeah, so maybe to follow that, for us, we're typically looking for innovation in proven frameworks. So we have a very growth equity-oriented style of investing where we're also looking for gross margin, we're looking for sustainable top-line growth, but we've also invested in companies that have been taking similar business models out of the US and bringing them into Europe. And so it might have a lot of competition, but those are proven businesses that have an existing customer base. And so the innovation is really either on the go-to-market, the customer experience, or just the operating structure.
Yeah, on our side, since we are deep tech, we tend to be a bit bolder. But we used like the TRL framework, if you're familiar with. So we don't invest in TRL before 4, I would say. So there needs to be a proof of concept of the technology. Then we run basic understanding with physics and math to see if the problem or the solution that you're proposing to the problem makes sense or not on the back of the envelope. Last but not least, we have a network of 150 LPs, which we call ambassador networks, which are on one side LPs, on the other business leaders in Europe. So they run businesses and they can help us in assessing the product market fit of your solution. And after the investment, if that happens, can help you to scale your business in Europe via their connections. And then depends, one more.
Yeah, totally.
Depends also at which stage of the fund are you.
Yeah.
Because if you are at typically it's 9-year the lifetime, right? The fund lifetime. So if you invest at the beginning, you are maybe taking more risks because you have more time. If you are towards the end of the fund, you tend to take less risks because you know that you have to return the money in maybe 4-3 years.
Yeah, I mean, related to that, maybe Stefan, and also yourself, Alicia, how do you look at timing? I mean, you're often looking at, early adopters versus more established companies. Where do you kind of manage your time in a way that you can still get the biggest advantage as an investor?
Yeah. I think it's a great question. In terms of the tech, I mean, we aren't deep tech investors, so we're typically looking for businesses that have customers and have traction. And so when we think about timing, we're thinking about, hey, is the customer timing there? Like, are they ready to adopt or buy this technology? And then from a timing perspective, in terms of coming into the deal, we typically come in around Series A to Series C. So we're looking to build those relationships at the pre-seed or seed. Typically when they're at around 350 to 500K run rate is when we start to build those relationships. I think especially in Europe, it's a lot more competitive at the Series A. So the earlier you can start building those relationships, the better.
How about you, Stefan?
It's probably a little different with us because we're principal investors, so we don't have a fund structure behind us, we don't have LPs or a strict constitution. So timing for us is more related to the situation where we find where can we define a value add which is measurable to the investment which we do, and that doesn't matter whether it's early stage, late stage, and what cycle the business in. And that is, I think, the key difference. And also, we have more time. We're more an evergreen fund. We can sit it out as long as we want. I know there's some limitation to as long as we want, but that gives some advantages. The downside is we have limited capital compared to the guys right next to me.
Yeah, I can see the appeal of longevity in health tech, for example, med tech, absolutely.
Yeah.
And Simone, I know we both share an interest in industrial tech. I mean, we've seen a lot of interest over the last decade, you know, IoT, computer vision, additive manufacturing, etc. But we have also seen a lot of companies that in the startup space that have really piloted very well, but failed to gain commercial traction, commercial customers that will pay for the product. What kinds of trends are you seeing now? And I guess, how does Europe really position itself here?
Yeah, so we still invest in industrial tech. It's actually the thesis of Fund 2, which is the one that we are currently deploying. And we believe that in Europe it's absolutely needed to have more productivity, and we need a lot of investment in that field that comes also via innovation and via startup. Be reminded that productivity is linked to investment. It's not linked to how many days of vacation you take. And if you don't believe me, we can do this example. I split the room in half. On this half, I give a calculator. On this half, I don't. Then I give you 1 million operation to do. And then measure productivity by the time that you take to complete a million operation. And then guess who will win in less time. So that being said, we believe that there is still room to play. We have in our portfolio companies like Generative Engineering or Circuit Minds who are innovating in the design space. Using artificial intelligence, that I think is fundamental to improve the, let's say, productivity of our companies in Europe. And yes, we do have a strong industrial background in Europe that we need to leverage. And that's what we are doing with the ambassador network that I mentioned before, that helps companies scale and should de-risk the case. Although you're never sure about product market fit. It's like having a crystal ball. Interesting.
Yeah. Stefan, I mean, you mentioned the Middle East. I mean, I guess a lot of companies at the moment are looking at where they will scale to. And, you know, the benchmark has always been the US. That might be changing. What do you see as kind of some of the key differences between, say, Europe and the Middle East and maybe a couple of other regions, if you're interested, in terms of startup ecosystems? How do they differ from what you've seen?
Well, I think it's life cycle. I think in Europe, well, when did we start? Probably mid-90s until today. So we have almost 30 years on our back. Experiences investing into startups on different levels and different industry segments. In the Middle East, I think we've seen very early on, 20 years ago, guys like Aymina, Khaldun, Trabesa, who has built probably the largest marketplace conglomerate, which now goes public in Riyadh in Saudi, where the Saudis invested in. But that's very rare. I think it's a very, very young ecosystem. Tentatively, and let me be more precise, I look at the GCCs, so the 4 Gulf states, Abu Dhabi, Dubai, Saudi, and Qatar. those are evolving faster than we've done. So the trajectory to capital, to success, to building business model already on the knowledge of the US, Europe, or any other markets are being capitalized. So it's a very speedy market. It's rich in capital, driven mostly from the Saudis. So if you want to be successful over there, you have to have your links to the Saudis. And therefore, I think it's an interesting market. The caveat to that is they're very small markets, except of Saudi Arabia. So you have to ask the question when you invest into the Nordics or in the Benelux years before, is that an international business model? How do I scale this? Because the local markets probably will not give way to that. So that's, and last but not least, I find, and I don't want to be, as this place is called Tech.eu, I don't want to say that the Europeans are tentatively not as passionate about work, ethics, and going into entrepreneurship whatsoever. I find the dynamics and the passionate environment of young people in the Middle East at the moment much more convincing than over here.
A big statement.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I hope I'm not stepping on any.
No, it's interesting. I mean, how does that manifest? I guess that's very interesting. Yeah.
Well, they just work more. Very simple, you know. It's not a work-life balance. It's working for success.
Working
and I
harder.
think the hunger and the desire to be successful is predominant. And here, I see more and more a level of work-life balance coming into a startup life, and I think that's a difficult one.
Yeah, maybe just to add on that, I think our core geos are US and Europe, and so I would respectfully disagree on that perspective. I mean, I think from our experience, I think, and I've been now investing in the European market for a year, so prior to that, spent a decade in the US investing there, was with Left Lane in New York for 3 years, and then just moved here a year ago to help lead our European practice. As a nod to the fact that there are such innovative companies coming out of Europe right now. I think if you look at tech hubs like Paris, Berlin, London, you're seeing really innovative AI companies like the #1 AI image company, #1 deep foundational model companies coming out of Europe today. And so, yes, I think work ethic is very dependent on the person and maybe has some cultural ties, but we've been really impressed with the talent that we've seen out of Europe so far.
Yeah, I mean, maybe a question for you with that in mind. I mean, how do you evaluate the scalability of a startup? Like, what kinds of things come into play?
Yeah, so for us, we're trying to balance fundamentals with future potential. So we look at all the things like you would think a founder market fit, so trying to evaluate the specific founder. Do they have a right to win in the problem that they're solving, in the market that they're in? We look at things like revenue growth, gross margin, retention, et cetera. And so those are kind of a few things that we look at when it comes to scalability.
And I've been, using this topic judiciously so that we don't have a whole day of it, perhaps. But I think a question for all of you would be, how do you see AI's role in shaping the future of investment strategies? Does it come into play? I mean, I know I saw an entrepreneur last week that has developed an AI angel investor. Mm-hmm. So it's just a model that can, it's currently made its first investment. So how are you using it, perhaps, is my question. And how are you making sense of it?
Yeah, so from an investment strategy perspective, we have a data engineer internally, so we pull on a lot of different data sources and signals from publicly available sources such as website traffic, LinkedIn growth, et cetera. And there are some funds that rely on this as their investment strategy. I think for us, where we've had the most success is investing in founders that we really believe in. This is a long-term relationship where the investment doesn't stop after you write the check. It's the years beyond that, and helping that company scale and succeed. And so for us, it's really a human business still. We'll leverage AI where we see fit, but at the end of the day, we're backing founders based on our personal relationship.
Yeah, great.
Yeah.
Simone, I know that Join Capital is looking at defense tech as an area to invest in. I mean, this has always been so controversial. People are always like, no, not going to touch it unless it's dual dual use, dual technologies, with the exception, of course, if you go to Ukraine, I was there last year, there's loads of people talking about it. How are you making sense of this as a company, and how do you kind of think about it?
Yeah, thank you for your question. So first of all, I think we need a bit more courage in Europe. And we need to recognize that most of the time innovation came from actually defense.
Yeah.
And I can give you an example. I'm Italian, so I will go back in time. I don't know as many of you know, but Leonardo da Vinci was hired in Milano not because he was an artist, but because he was an engineer who invented many machines for war. And then he also happened to be a great artist. So that's what I want to say is that we use defense as a way, as a tool, as a lens to scout for new technologies that can have impact also in, let's say, in the industry. So on one way, it's a tool to look for technology. It may happen that the technology is already applicable in defense, so you have first contract from defense. And that is a proof of the fact that the things exist and works, and then scale in the industry, or it can have like directly industry application and big defense can come later. It's very hard to judge, but we do believe that most of the innovation came from there, and you can take internet, you can take semiconductor, you can name it. There are many technologies that originally came from there. That's what we are trying to do. We're not just investing in defense for the sake of let's do another war.
And I know you also mentioned space tech. I mean, it's funny. We actually had one of our keynote speakers was from a US space tech company that was doing some really cool stuff, but they ran out of money, unfortunately. But can we build unicorns in space in Europe? Like, how do we position ourselves here to make sense of it?
Yeah, normally space and defense, they go together. And I'm very positive, otherwise I wouldn't be here.
Oh yeah, totally.
So yes, we can have a unicorn, and what I think is that we can because we have an ecosystem in Europe in space. Take Airbus, take Safran, BAE System, Leonardo. So we have industry that do the ecosystem, can make the acquisition. For example, it's way more difficult to build a unicorn in compute in Europe, successful. Because we don't have the customers. They're all in the US. Whereas in space, we do have an ecosystem.
Yeah, makes sense. I guess we've got a couple of minutes, so a question for everybody is around talent mobility. I mean, we've always thought about, talent leaving Europe, the talent gap, this problem. What kind of trends are you seeing now? And do you think that the problems or the challenges in the US may see us getting talent returning and bringing that R&D and that legacy knowledge from their own startups that they've scaled there?
It's a good question. It's a very good question. So, I mean, I said a little bit about talent, comparing it to the Middle East. My view is that talent at the moment, we have enough talent, let's put it like this, that's my first statement, in Europe. However, it's scattered all over the place. So I find certain hubs where there is an abundance of incredibly smart, trained and focused people. So take Portugal at the moment. If you go in certain region, depending on what kind of talent on the engineering side, on sales side you're looking at. I've seen a tremendous talent coming out of Greece, which we hire. And why is that in those regions? I think, A, it's the quality of living, which attracts talent. Secondly, I think it's universities. I think good universities, even younger ones, evolving universities, build and attract talent. So it's not that easy anymore that you stay in your own city, in your own region, and pluck talent out of it left, right, center. You have to look around and you have to go across borders, which I like because it sounds a little bit like a unified Europe talent pool base, and I kind of find that pretty good.
Yeah, it's a really interesting topic. I mean, I was at an event last week in Berlin where they were talking about in the health tech space, why don't we have a central hub in Europe just for health tech? Like, you have Boston, for example, in the US. People got so upset. The idea that you were limited to one region. So I think it's an evolving space. But we're out of time. So I'm so sorry. We could have probably spoken for another half an hour because so many great topics. So thank you all for being here. We are going to have our startups come up.